Harlem, Sunday, 1951. Mount Olivet Baptist Church was packed with 300 people attending the funeral of jazz singer Lena Mae Carter, 32 years old. Police recorded in their report that she hanged herself in her apartment on Lenox Avenue. Everyone accepted it, except one person. Bumpy Johnson sat in the second row, quietly stood up. He and Lena had broken up years ago, so when he walked forward, many eyes followed with curiosity. Bumpy went to the side of the coffin, looked down at the face heavily coated with powder, then his gaze stopped at her neck. The powder extended all the way to her hairline. Bumpy ran 2 fingers lightly across, rubbing a short line. The powder flaked off, revealing deep, purple bruises indented in the direction the rope had pulled. The entire church fell silent. Bumpy stared at those marks for a long time, then said softly, "Lena did not take her own life. There was another hand in this death." The mourners looked at one another, whispering, fearful. Some had already guessed something the moment Bumpy touched Lena's neck, and now his words confirmed it, making the air heavy. Bumpy stood straight, eyes toward the door, as if he had finished what he came to do. He knew this was no longer a single death. In the next 4 days, this death would lead to 3 more lives lost, force 6 police officers to resign, and change how Harlem dealt with those who used power to cover up crimes. But to understand why things went so far, it must begin with the woman who made the entire community rise up to demand the truth for her. In the back, from the shadows against the wall, 2 men had just stepped out and followed her every step. Eddie Callahan, owner of a white club, trying to force his way into Harlem, and police officer Raymond Kessler of the 28th Precinct. Callahan had been tailing Lena for 3 weeks. He wanted to sign her to a performance contract with coercive clauses, keeping her under his control to serve his ambition of expanding influence. Lena refused. She even said that if Callahan continued, she would tell 2 black reporters investigating exploited artists in Midtown clubs. With Kessler, it was more serious. He took money from Callahan every month in exchange for silence on violations in the entertainment district. A singer who knew that secret was a threat. When Lena said she would expose them, both understood she had crossed the line that forced them to act. Lena walked to the end of the alley, just turning onto the main street, when Callahan's black Bullock pulled up. The back door swung open. Lena stopped, about to turn back into the shop, but it was too late. Callahan grabbed her wrist, yanked hard, while Kessler pushed from behind. She let out a short cry before being forced into the back seat. The car door slammed shut, locks clicked. The Bullock sped toward an abandoned warehouse near the old docks, where nighttime noises went unnoticed. Inside the warehouse, the overhead light flickered. Lena tried to stand straight, trying to steady her breathing. Callahan shoved her down onto a wooden chair in the middle of the room. Kessler locked the door and approached. He asked who she had given documents to, which reporters she had spoken with, what evidence she held. Lena was silent for a few seconds, then said she had no documents, that everything she said was just to push him back. Callahan didn't believe her. He slapped her, his heavy hand knocking her head to the side. Kessler stepped forward, voice cold. "You think you can stand against us?" Lena looked straight at him, breathing fast but still clear. "You people are doing wrong. I won't bow down." Her words changed the moment in the room entirely. Callahan looked at Kessler, then back at Lena. "You think a singer in Harlem can threaten me?" Lena stood up suddenly, trying to run toward the door, but Callahan had already taken a rope hidden in his coat pocket. He wrapped it around her neck, pulled hard. Lena tried to tear the rope, hands clawing at her throat, feet kicking the floor for leverage. Kessler pinned her hands down, holding her shoulders tight. Lena's voice choked in her throat. Only ragged breaths remained. Callahan pulled again. Lena's head dropped. Her body gradually went limp. When Callahan released the rope, Lena no longer moved. The room sank into heavy silence. Callahan looked down at the body, breathing hard. Kessler placed his hands on his hips, then walked a circle around the chair. After a few seconds, he said, "We have to make this look right." Callahan stayed silent. Kessler continued, "Hang her up. People will believe she was desperate. A young singer pressure, no money. Everyone will accept it right away." Callahan nodded. He and Kessler carried Lena's body out of the warehouse, placed it in the back of the car. No one said anything more. When they reached Lenox Avenue, Kessler used a tool to unlock apartment 3B. Inside, it was dark and quiet. On the table were a few sheets of music. Lena had been practicing. They carried her into the living room. Kessler looked up at the light fixture hook near the window and signaled. They used the same rope, wrapped it around the light bar, lifted Lena's body up. Her feet dangled, head tilted to one side, hair falling over her shoulders. Callahan adjusted the position, pulled Lena's dress to cover the marks. He took a damp cloth to wipe her neck, trying to erase the indentations, but the deep purple lines remained clear. "It'll be enough for the police to believe," he said quietly. Kessler replied flatly, "Believe or not, they'll go along with it." He looked around the room, rearranged a few items to make the scene look more natural. Then they left the apartment, locked the door. Kessler went to the payphone booth at the end of the street. He called Sergeant Lucklin. "There's a suicide. Female singer. File it tonight. No need for detailed examination." Lucklin agreed, asking only one question. "Any issues?" Kessler replied, "No, everything's taken care of." Night wind swept through the apartment hallway as Kessler returned to the car. Callahan looked out the window, hands trembling slightly, then said softly, "She should have just signed." "Why did it have to come to this?" Kessler didn't turn, only answered, "She opened her mouth and both of us would be finished." The Buick rolled away from Lenox Avenue, disappearing into the darkness. In apartment 3B, Lena's body hung silently under the light hook, the rope burns still deeply etched on her neck. A few hours later, the police report would conclude she had taken her own life. A few hours later, all of Harlem would hear the news and accept it, because no one yet knew what had happened in that dark room. But the marks on Lena's neck would not disappear, and those very purple lines would cause everything to collapse in the 4 days that followed. The death certificate was filed early in the morning, just hours after Lena's body was discovered. The NYPD report contained only 4 words: suicide by hanging, no notes about unusual injuries. At the morgue, the night shift doctor was pulled aside by Sergeant Lucklin, voice low but forceful enough to make anyone understand this was not open for debate. He told him to just sign the confirmation. Don't ask questions. Don't add details. The medical examiner glanced at Lena's neck before signing, saw the thick powder and some darkened patches but didn't dare linger. Lucklin stood close by as a reminder that one wrong move and his entire career would crash. An hour later, the official death certificate was stamped. Meanwhile, Callahan sat in the office of a familiar broker in Midtown, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "This has to go smoothly," he said. The broker nodded, saying a few officers in the 28th precinct would be reminded to let the file go the desired way. This coordination needed no more explanation. A nod was enough for every link in the cover-up chain to run smoothly. By noon, news of Lena's suicide spread throughout Harlem. People whispered in coffee shops, in hospital waiting rows, in stores lining Lenox Avenue. Everyone was shocked, but the shock quickly turned to confusion. Lena had just announced a 6-month contract with the Savoy Ballroom, an opportunity any singer would dream of. She was healthy, performing regularly, still planning to buy a new apartment on 145th Street. Those close to her insisted they had never seen Lena depressed enough to take her own life. No one understood why, even less why the police closed the case so quickly. The NYPD's silence fueled the rumors. In the building across from apartment 3B, night watchman Henry Dawson had seen more than anyone. Around midnight, he heard a scream echo from Lena's apartment, then something heavy falling to the floor and hurried footsteps. He got up from his chair, went to the window and looked down. Under the dim streetlight, he saw 2 men hurrying out of the building's exit. One of them pulled up his collar, hand holding something that looked like a coiled rope. They moved quickly to a Buick parked near the corner and vanished in seconds. Henry had been the night watchman here for over 12 years, had witnessed many fights. Many times police ignored questions when it involved black people. He clearly remembered 1946, when his friend was beaten right below his apartment and the complaint went nowhere. That memory left him frozen at the window the night Lena was hanged. He wanted to call the police, but his hand holding the receiver trembled and set it down. He knew if he spoke, he would face men with badges and guns, people who could cost him his job in one night. Or worse, so he chose silence, folding the truth inside himself. But all the next morning, when he heard building residents say Lena committed suicide, he only stared at the floor, hands clenched tight. He knew he had seen what no one else had. Lena did not hang herself alone, and that truth would not stay quiet long. Henry Dawson sat all afternoon with a blank sheet of paper in front of him, unsure how to start. By evening, when the whispers about Lena's suicide echoed again in the hallway, he decided he had to do something. He took a pen, wrote slowly and clearly each word. I saw 2 men leave Lena's apartment. One was a police officer. He read it twice, then folded the paper into an envelope. His hand trembled slightly, not from age but because he knew he was creating the first crack in the cover. NYPD had built in just hours. At 1:47 a.m., he put on his coat hat, walked 5 blocks to Small's Paradise. The summer night was quiet. Harlem bathed in the dim lights of late-open shops. He didn't walk fast, each step deliberate, as if any sound behind him could be someone following. When he reached Small's Paradise, the door was locked. No one inside, only a small light flickering on the 2nd floor, where Bumpy Johnson's office was. Henry looked around, sure no one was watching, then bent down and slit the envelope under the door crack. He stood up, took a deep breath, then turned back, heart heavy but lighter than when he left home. He knew only one person could set this truth in motion. Bumpy. The next morning, around 6 a.m., Bumpy Johnson arrived at his office early as usual. When he opened the door, he saw the envelope right at the foot of his desk. He picked it up, opened it, read the contents. Each word stood out clearly, making his hand clench instinctively. This was what he had felt the moment he touched Lena's neck at the funeral yesterday. Someone strangled cannot hang themselves. And now he had a witness saying police were involved. Bumpy sat down, holding the paper. A fleeting moment reminded him of the last evening he met Lena in 1948. When they parted, she looked at him a long time and said softly, like an instruction, "If one day I die, Ellsworth, Don't believe anyone. He had smiled lightly then, thinking she said it because of fears around his disputes. But now, those words became her final warning. The office door opened. Illinois walked in, holding a cup of coffee. Seeing Bumpy's tense face, he asked right away, "You don't believe she did it, do you?" Bumpy held up the paper, said briefly, "Lena never knew how to tie a knot." Illinois skimmed the contents, set the paper on the desk. He said last night, police closed the file at unnatural speed. Bumpy stood up, adjusted the hat on the desk, then said, "Start." The order was simple, but Illinois understood the wheels were turning. First task was to get names of all police at the 3B apartment scene. Illinois had contacts at the 28th precinct, enough to get the list of who was on duty and who signed reports. Next was the medical report. Bumpy wanted to know if anyone really examined Lena's neck or just signed off. He also told Illinois to find test records from the new elevator cameras in the opposite building. Though the technology was crude, there was hope it captured the bubik or figures at midnight. Finally, Bumpy wanted to know where Eddie Callahan fit in this. He was the one who had approached Lena for Midtown, and Lena had told a fellow performer she felt uneasy when he appeared near her home. "Anyone tied to him. I want names and roles," Bumpy said. Illinois nodded, jotted down each item quickly. When he left, Bumpy stood alone in the office for a few seconds. He looked at Henry Dawson's paper again, a thin sheet, but enough to change the entire course of the case. That morning, Harlem had not fully awakened, but Bumpy already knew what happened to Lena could not be buried under one line of suicide in a file. And as he began investigating, those behind her death would face what they never wanted to touch: the truth. Illinois started that day, going from Small's Paradise to clubs along Lenox Avenue, asking about Eddie Callahan. Information came faster than expected. In recent months, Callahan had been trying to expand his performance market, approaching notable but unprotected black singers, offering contracts with unfavorable terms, high percentage cuts, long commitments, even forcing them to perform in midtown clubs notorious for racism. 3 people in the music scene said anyone who refused faced trouble. Singer Willie Moore recounted Callahan sending 2 white guys to threaten him right after a show when he refused to sign. The most important information came from Mildred Jones, 27, a freelance singer at several Harlem clubs. When Illinois found her small apartment on 137th Street, Mildred was not surprised to hear Callahan's name. She said he tried to force her to sign in February 1951. When she refused, Callahan punched her in the jaw, requiring 3 stitches. She didn't report to police because she knew Callahan's money would silence them. But when she heard Lena died in a suicide, Mildred burst into tears and said, "If you're asking, I'll testify. Lena was a good person. She didn't do that." Illinois recorded her words, then gave Bumpy the summary. Next information concerned Officer Raymond Kessler. Someone in the illegal gambling tax system revealed Kessler received envelopes from Callahan regularly each month, about $120 to $150, to ensure minor disturbances, disputes, or complaints in his clubs never reached higher levels. This explained why Lena's death report closed so fast. The cover-up wasn't just one officer. Sergeant Thomas Laughlin's name surfaced immediately. Laughlin, 43, had served in Europe, returned with a clean military record, but many rumors of racist behavior. Harlem residents knew him well. He often patrolled Lenox Avenue, looking at black people with suspicion and contempt. Under him, many complaints vanished, and he was the one who pressured the medical examiner to sign Lena's death certificate. Bumpy read everything in silence. He knew they had only scratched the surface of a dark network. That afternoon, he went to see Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. at the Olivet Baptist Church office. Powell reviewed the death report Bumpy brought. The paper was too clean, too simple for a hanging. Powell said, "If Lena didn't die the way they wrote, Harlem has a right to know the truth, no matter the cost." He promised to help Bumpy access documents NYPD tried to hide. Meanwhile, Lachlan began sensing someone new. He went to Henry Dawson's building. In the dark stairwell, he called him out, asked vaguely about noises the night Lena died, asked if he saw anyone coming or going. Henry trembled but said he went to bed early. Lachlan stared at him long, then left with a suspicious look. But that brief contact was enough for Bumpy to understand. Henry was no longer safe. When Illinois reported back, Bumpy only nodded, said, "He's scared. The network is starting to shake." To keep things moving, Illinois returned to the garage where Callahan's Buick was stored. He went with a mechanic acquaintance. When they opened the trunk, they saw the rope hastily coiled, still damp from that wet night. Part of the rope had small fabric fibers from Lena's dress. Illinois touched it, his skin prickling. "We have what we need," he said. He wrapped the rope in cloth, brought it to Bumpy. When looking at the rope, Bumpy was silent for quite a while. He knew it was not just evidence. It was the silent confession Callahan and Kessler left behind. "This isn't suicide," Bumpy said. "This is what they do when they want quick, easy to stage, and think no one cares enough to ask more." But he knew, and Harlem would know. After having the evidence, Bumpy decided he had to meet Kessler again, not at the 28th precinct where Lachlan could interfere, but somewhere he couldn't lean on anyone. Bumpy sent a message to Kessler through a community intermediary. That evening, in the parking lot behind an old grocery store on 132nd Street, Kessler showed up. He leaned against an abandoned truck, eyes darting around. When Bumpy stepped out of the shadows, Kessler instinctively stepped back. Bumpy said nothing, just tossed the rope to the ground in front of him. "You know what this is," Bumpy said, "and you know where it will take you." Kessler stammered that he didn't directly kill Lena, he only helped stage it. Bumpy interrupted, "You dragged her up the stairs. We have footage. You took money from Callahan. We have papers. You entered the apartment that night. We have a witness." Kessler trembled more. When he tried to explain, Bumpy continued, "I'm not asking if you did it. I'm asking who ordered it." Kessler looked down at the rope, then at the darkness behind Bumpy. Finally, he sighed like someone releasing the last grip. "Callahan. He wanted her silenced, and Lachlan. He told me to finish it fast." Bumpy nodded. This was what he had guessed, but hearing it from Kessler's mouth made the picture complete, and complete meant no way back. Bumpy's next target was Callahan. Alone he wasn't fearsome, but his money, connections, and network were what hurt Harlem time and again. That was why Bumpy had to make him collapse with the truth he thought no one would find. That night, Bumpy returned to Callahan's club for the second time that day. The atmosphere in the club had changed. Word of Bumpy's midday visit spread fast, making people whisper, look around anxiously. But Bumpy didn't come to make noise. He came to finish the second step of the plan. Callahan was sitting with two partners. When he saw Bumpy, he frowned. "I'm busy," he said. Bumpy replied, "Won't be long." He placed a roll of paper containing camera footage copies on the table. One of Callahan's two partners looked down, saw a figure resembling Callahan, pulling a woman into the building. He stood up abruptly, cursed, and walked out. Callahan went pale. "This garbage proves nothing," he tried to say. Bumpy shook his head. "Lena didn't die alone, and neither will you." Those words made Callahan slump back into his chair. He understood the message. Not a threat, but an unavoidable truth. Footsteps around the table stopped. The club was quiet for a few seconds. Bumpy turned and left the table, leaving Callahan trembling in silence. When he stepped out of the club, Illinois was waiting. "Done?" he asked. Bumpy replied, "He's starting to fear." Fear is when people tell the truth. And just as he said, from the moment Callahan's hands shook before the photo and film, the balance of the entire game began to tilt. Those who thought they controlled everything were backing off, while Harlem was only beginning to wake up. That very evening, Callahan trembled in the club. Bumpy's plan moved to the final phase. Harlem lights twinkled on Lenox as Illinois drove around Midtown, waiting for the right moment to intercept Callahan before he could run to someone who might protect him. When Callahan stepped out the side door of the club, Illinois closed in from behind, threw a burlap sack over his head, and pushed him into the car. At the same time, another group of Bumpy's men followed Kessler from the 28th Precinct, intercepted him right as he left his shift. They didn't beat, didn't tie with unnecessary violence. They did just enough so no one nearby noticed, then put him in a gray sedan heading west Harlem. The two who once thought they could decide Lena's fate were brought to the very place where her voice once silenced the room, the Apollo Theater. One of Harlem's greatest symbols now became the stage for truth. Bumpy waited on the dark stage, only one overhead light shining down on the middle of the wooden floor. The audience seats were empty, but felt like hundreds of invisible eyes watching. Callahan was dragged on stage first, still shaking, mouth stammering, asking what Bumpy wanted. Kessler was pushed in after, hands lightly bound with cloth. Bumpy pointed to the stage light hook, where Lena once stood adjusting her mic. On the hook, he hung the exact rope found in Callahan's car. No knot tied, just left dangling as a reminder of the deadly night these two caused. "Look," Bumpy said, "this is what you used." Callahan avoided his eyes, but Kessler stared at the rope as if it were the final witness against him. Bumpy signaled. Illinois placed a reel-to-reel tape recorder on the table, sound sharper and clearer than vinyl records. He pressed play. The reel began turning. The steady whir echoed in the empty space. "You two will say what you did," Bumpy said. "If not, this tape will keep rolling until someone tells the truth." Callahan yelled that he was forced, that he didn't mean to kill. Bumpy stayed silent, letting Callahan's breathing echo in the theater. Kessler glanced at the rope, then said quietly, "She knew too much. They told me to stage the scene." Bumpy nodded lightly, but didn't stop. "Who told you?" Kessler swallowed. "Callahan and Laughlin." The tape kept rolling, the recorder's metal sound faintly through the space. Callahan dropped to his knees, holding his head. "I didn't want her to die," she screamed. "Then I pulled too hard." He cried. His voice cracked as he said, "She didn't deserve to die." Bumpy stepped closer, looking down like at someone who dug his own grave. "She deserved to live the life you stole," he said, "and tonight you will give back that truth." When the tape had recorded enough, Illinois stopped the machine. Bumpy looked at his men, then directed them to take the two to the backstage area to wait for the next step. But before they could leave the stage, the side door of the Apollo burst open. Sergeant Thomas Laughlin appeared with 2 officers behind him. He strode straight to the stage, shouting, "Release them now. You have no right to hold them." Bumpy turned, standing center stage, light shining on his face, calm as if he had waited for this confrontation long ago. "I'm not holding them," he said. "They hold themselves with their guilt." Laughlin stepped up 1 level, hand on his gun. "This is unlawful detention. You know the consequences." Bumpy didn't back down. He pulled a stack of files from his coat pocket, dropped them at Laughlin's feet. Pages slid out. Complaints of black people beaten by him in 1947, distorted reports in 1949, erased witness statements in a 1950 investigation. "I know the consequences of these too," Bumpy said, "and the Amsterdam News will know if I send the files." Laughlin stood still. The 2 officers behind looked at him, then at the papers on the floor. No one wanted to touch this. Bumpy continued, "You didn't come here to save them. You came to save yourself." Laughlin stiffened. He stepped back slightly, then turned to Kessler. "What did you tell him?" Kessler only bowed his head. No answer. Bumpy took 1 step forward. "Want to hear the confession? The tape is enough to bring all 3 of you before the public." Laughlin looked at the recorder, understanding this battle ended before he entered the theater. No threat fit anymore. He let go of his gun, stepped back off the stage. Illinois walked over, stood beside Bumpy. "Now what?" he asked. Bumpy looked at Callahan and Kessler, both broken, their own confessions having shattered the last remnants of arrogance. "We hand them to the people who actually do their job," he said. "Not the corrupt officers of the 28th Precinct, but the honest police group introduced by Reverend Powell, a small group, but enough to secure evidence and follow proper procedure. When that group arrived, they didn't ask much. They collected the tape, took preliminary statements, cuffed Callahan and Kessler, and took them away. No shouting, no resistance, only 1 last sentence from Callahan as he was led out. "I never thought she would die." Bumpy didn't reply. He just watched, eyes without pity. As for Kessler, before being pushed into the car, he turned back to look at the rope Bumpy had hung on stage. He trembled again, as if only now realizing truth can sometimes be more terrifying than death. As for Laughlin, he stood at the theater door, blocked by Powell and 3 community members. Powell handed him a copy of the file. Bumpy had dropped. "You'll resign," Powell said. "Harlem has endured enough." Laughlin knew he had no escape. If he fought, the press would get involved. If he stayed silent, his career was over. He chose silence, walking into the night like a man stripped of his armor. When everyone left the Apollo Theater, the stage light still shone on the dangling rope. Bumpy stood looking at it for a few seconds, then pulled it down, coiled it, put it in his pocket. "Let's go," he said to Illinois. "Harlem will know this the right way." The abduction and confession didn't make a big explosion, no body floating in the river like other underworld stories. But it was enough to sever the entire power network that covered up Lena's death. And in that way, justice in Harlem tonight was as sharp as a blade, but clearer than any court verdict could be. 3 days after the truth was recorded on the tape in the Apollo Theater, a second memorial for Lena Mae Carter was held at Mount Olivet. News of Callahan and Kessler's confessions spread fast across Harlem, not through newspapers, but through small conversations on sidewalks, in barber shops, in pews after services. People came to the church very early, more than the first time. The somber air of the first funeral was gone, replaced by the solemnity of a community coming to witness truth return to the woman they loved. The coffin was open, but this time Lena's face was no longer hidden by thick powder. The marks had been fully documented in the new file, nothing left to conceal. She was dressed in the gown her mother had kept for her first big performance at the Savoy Ballroom, a plan she never got to fulfill. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. stepped to the pulpit, looking down at the packed room. His voice rang deep and firm. Harlem stands strong because Harlem people stand up for each other. And today, we don't just mourn a voice. We come to say that Lena's life was not erased by a false report. Low amens spread from the front rows. Powell continued speaking about the courage of those who spoke out, the community's responsibility when one is robbed of truth, and how Harlem cannot be subdued by those who use power to hide crimes. When he finished the sermon, the atmosphere in the church felt lifted to another level, no longer just grief but pride. Afterward, Lena's mother walked to Bumpy. She had aged much in just days, but her eyes no longer held the confusion of the first funeral. She took Bumpy's hand, gave him a small old photo. Lena at 19, hair in 2 braids, standing at the house door with a bright smile and hopeful eyes. "She wanted you to keep this," she said in a trembling but clear voice. "She once said you were the reason she dared sing in front of crowds the first time." Bumpy took the photo, looked at it long. This was no longer the woman hung by a rope in a cold apartment. This was the girl he once saved from a small alley in 1942, who called him by a name few dared, who dreamed of a peaceful life Harlem sometimes couldn't give. When the coffin was carried out the church door, hundreds stood along both sides of the steps. They let silence speak for their hearts. Then someone, from some row, began to chant, "Harlem remembers." Others joined immediately. "Harlem remembers. Harlem remembers." The chant rang out the church door, echoing down the blocks along Lenox Avenue. Bumpy stood at the exit, black hat in hand, watching the crowd chant Lena's name. Light through the church door fell on his face, highlighting a rare calm. He said nothing, just held Lena's photo, like a promise and a final farewell. As the chant, "Harlem remembers," continued outside, Bumpy understood that today's justice didn't come through violence or blind revenge. It came through truth, through the courage of those who dared speak, and through the unity of a community that always knows how to protect its own. Lena was carried to the hearse, the crowd slowly following behind. Bumpy lingered a few seconds before stepping down the stairs, joining that line. And in that moment, Harlem seemed to say the same thing: Lena's death would never be forgotten. A few days after the second memorial, the Amsterdam News published the issue all Harlem waited for. On the front page was the bold headline, "Confessions to the Death of Lena Mae Carter." Below was a summary of the tape from the Apollo Theater, Callahan's trembling words, Kessler's admissions, Powell's confirmation of the new medical file, and NYPD having to reopen the investigation. The 3 names, Callahan, Kessler, Laughlin, appeared publicly in print, forcing the police department to answer to the community. In just 2 days, the Internal Affairs Office sent an official notice. All 3 would face full investigation, all related files would be reviewed, and any officer involved in the cover-up would be held accountable. Harlem greeted the news with satisfied silence, not loud celebration, but the feeling that justice had finally turned the right way. Night fell, the neighborhood still rang with scattered music from clubs on Lenox Avenue. Streetlights glowed yellow, shining on still open windows, the footsteps of night shift workers tapping the sidewalk in light but clear rhythm. Late summer chills swept through the blocks, carrying a rare sense of peace after stormy days. Bumpy walked alone along the stretch leading to apartment 3B, where Lena's life ended in a scene Harlem now knew was a lie. He stopped in front of the building, looked up at the dark window. No one stood there anymore. No one could hear Lena's light singing like breath as she practiced new songs, but her memory still hung in the air, like something that never left. Bumpy placed his hand on the doorframe, just to touch where Lena passed every night returning from performances. He looked at the door for a long time, saying nothing. Wind carried the whispers of the night street. Somewhere in that quiet, it seemed Lena softly sang a familiar melody, enough to make him remember the moment she smiled and called him by the name few dared use. When he turned to leave, his shadow stretched long on the sidewalk, blending into the streetlight and Harlem's stillness after a quiet but profound battle. In the newspaper, on people's lips at street corners, in music from Small's Paradise and the Apollo Theater, Lena's story lived again. And then, as the line Harlem would pass down for years, they said Lena died by her own hand. But Harlem knows the truth, and Bumpy Johnson is the one who made the whole world know it. If you want to hear more stories told with the truth and blood of Harlem, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for following to the end. See you in the next journey.